the better you know who you are, the more firmly you are grounded in your values, the higher your tolerance for risk.
Oh, wow.
And that, by extension, then builds up your resilience.
Welcome to Oxygen for Educators, part of the Ripple Maker Project. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder, and you'll meet Chris Kent Phelps in just a bit. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to talk about this interview.
Me too. Should I introduce Mark quickly?
You should. Yes, but before we do that, you're good?
I'm good. Yeah.
Good. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too.
Thanks
for checking me on that because I haven't really seen you much this week.
Yeah, I don't know why, but it feels like it's been a longer span. But I think it's just time is weird right now. Like, what is time?
It's moving so fast. More and more people keep saying that time feels like it's moving at such a fast clip.
Yeah. It makes me wonder about like the disorientation of that. And then like, how are we relating to the disorientation of it? Like, are you in kind of graspy, like, this doesn't feel safe, I don't know what to do with the way this feels? Or are you in like roller coaster arms up in the air mode? So I've been paying attention to that. Your arms up in the air mode?
I like fast pace.
Yeah. And what does it mean to believe it's taking us somewhere? I find that to be a fun thing to think about. Like, how do we show up in the world if we feel like it's spiraling out of control versus spiraling toward something that we can all kind of co-create? Anyway, I'm getting way too weird right out of the gate, so please,
That's why we
go
love
on.
You. Okay,
please go on.
So our guest today is Mark Crotty. He's an educator turned administrator, currently the executive director of the Northwest Association of Independent Schools, and he'll soon be joining Educators Collaborative as a consultant. But my favorite thing about Mark is that he is a deep thinker. This interview made me think so much, and I thought a lot about how much I wish he had a seat at the table to be solving some of the major problems of our country, because he just has such a thoughtful perspective. Wise person.
Love that. Yes, wise, and a very unusual head-heart connection.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. Let's hear from Mark.
Let's do it.
Hi, Mark.
Hey.
I'm so excited to have you on the podcast because every time you and I have ever had a conversation, you always introduce new complexity, and I always leave thinking about it. You know, like it's sticky for me, the way you see this work and the way you see the world. So I'm excited for our listeners to get to hear a little bit.
Well, thanks for having me. I was so excited to get your email inviting me to come on with you.
Well, I'm just excited anytime we get to interact because you're like a tried and true someone I can have like a real conversation with, even if we haven't talked for like 6 months. And that's gold these days. So thank you for that.
Well, I think it goes back to when we first connected was when you were at Momentous doing that Changing the Odds conference.
Yep.
And it's just kind of grown from there. And that conference was about getting at what really matters in education, right?
Yeah. And you caught my eye in particular because you would write summaries of your experience. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, who is this guy? Who's this guy who thinks like this? So now
and
you're
you didn't
no
run
longer
away.
a mystery.
That's good.
I didn't run away. I ran toward the brilliant. Well, let's give folks a little grounding in who you are. Let's
Sure.
hear a little of your story.
Yeah. So, in some ways, I'm like the last person who should be working in schools. I grew up hating school. I couldn't stand it. And I think that has shaped a lot of how I think about it, try to approach it. School's got to be about shaping us as people, right? Not little academics, not little calculators or, human reference books or something. There's something much fuller to it than that. So, it was really interesting because I thought I was going to go into radio when I was in college. And I had what they called an externship at a progressive radio station in New York City. And I hated every moment of it. I discovered that even at this corporate radio station, it was progressive radio station, it was incredibly corporate. The records were all color coded. You had to play so many colors of each every hour and this kind of thing.
Oh my gosh.
And I went back to the career counselor at my college and said, now what? And she talked to me for about 30 minutes and said, you should think about working in an independent school. And I said, that sounds really cool. Can you tell me what that is? And somehow I landed a job at this tiny, very young school in deep southern Louisiana, even though I'd grown up in New York. And it took about 2 weeks. And I was like, this is what I'm meant to be doing.
Okay, what was it about it that hit that sweet spot so dramatically?
I think some of it was the school where I was working. It was a very kid-centered school. It was a school that, even though it was very young, it very much knew who it was. It was about very holistic in its approach. I think the fact that I was both teaching and coaching soccer, and so I was able to connect with kids in those two ways that I didn't feel like teachers had ever connected with me. I went to a really large public school, and you were either like really academic, or you were a jock, or you were a stoner, or you were whatever. And this was so like communal feeling, and everybody respected for who they were. And I was like, this is really great.
Yeah. It makes me think you are precisely the right person to be in education because you hated school. Like you were so tuned into what you didn't get that then drew you to giving it to kids and systems your whole career.
I think so. I hope so. And it's interesting because I think a lot of the best teachers I've seen, you talk to them and they had that same sort of experience. Or they're people who have brought other parts of their lives other than their school life to what they do. I think it's also interesting that I've seen some really great teachers who are second career people because they bring a different kind of perspective to it about, what's really important in this. What do you really need to develop as you're growing up that's going to serve you well?
Wow. And since that tiny school in Louisiana, you've taught, you've led schools, you've led associations, you're like in all of those different roles. Has what you think kids need to grow into humans that we're all feeling good about in the world, like, has it changed? Has it felt very same or?
That's a great question. And it's interesting because I was thinking about that exact question the other day.
Yeah.
And I went back and I happened to be cleaning out some stuff. And I found my statement of educational philosophy from back in the late 1980s. And I talked about how school should be about helping people find their meaning and purpose.
Oh, wow.
And it's the exact same thing I believe now. I just think the circumstances and what that means and the way to go about doing that, that's changed. But that essential thing is still exactly the same.
Wow.
It's about how we relate to each other, how we see ourselves as contributors, how, we are going to, this whole idea that got really big for a while, but, go out and change the world and so forth and so on. Okay, that's admirable. That's great. But do a great job in your little corner of it.
Yeah.
And if enough people do that, then maybe the world changes. So you're helping people figure out who they are as individuals, what their worth is, what they can do.
This is so interesting, the threads, because in a few weeks we're going to have the honor of interviewing Viktor Frankl's grandson.
Oh, wow.
And of course, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning and developed logotherapy, and that the inoculation of meaning and purpose for so much of the heaviness that people are feeling right now just is very present for our team. Tell me what you see with the adults that you work with, the leaders and the teachers, educators, like what's happening in terms of meaning and purpose and stress and pressure, and like how's all that souping up right now in your world?
It's people are hurting. And that hurt is kind of manifesting itself in different ways. There are the people who are like, I'm going to fight this. I am going to resist. I know what I stand for. I'm not giving in. There are other people kind of sticking their heads in the sand and trying to ignore it all. There are people who are just burned out and have said, that's it. I've had enough.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of people who I'd say are doing really well right now. After the pandemic, it was really interesting because I think people were so excited that, we can go out and do all this stuff again. And there was all this back to normal. I don't think we have any idea yet what the ramifications of that experience are.
Agree.
And you add to all the tumult, tension, whatever you want to call it, that we're feeling as a society right now. And, it's reached such a crescendo that you can forget that has been building for a long time. It's not like it's there all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And our systems are just, our personal systems, physiologically, psychologically, spiritually, are just being worn down.
Yeah.
I just spend a lot of time just listening to people. And, I don't try to sugarcoat it. I'm not trying to tell them, well, you're going to be okay. It's all going to be all right.
Right.
Because people are having a hard time believing that now.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you see happen to their systems when there is that deep listening?
you see a little bit of, I wouldn't quite call it relaxing, but
Mm-hmm.
they breathe a little bit more easily.
Mm-hmm.
They don't feel quite so alone.
Yeah.
They feel a degree of connection and
Yeah.
support. That sense of, okay, I'm not the only one who's going through this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we underestimate what it means to sit with someone and listen deeply. And the issues are so huge right now that we can feel like I have no idea how to make a difference. But just like truly genuinely being with another human creates like a nervous system sense of safety enough for them to at least get back into the part of their brain where they can go, what can I do? What do I need? ...
Yeah. We recently started a new program here. Um, Being head of an independent school is an incredibly difficult job.
Mm-hmm.
All of the demands on it, and that you're running a very complex organization, complex business.
Yeah.
It's incredibly hard. It's a very isolating job.
Mm-hmm.
And we recently started a program called Heads in Partnership, where our heads of school have the opportunity to meet with a cohort of their peers about once a month. No agenda unless they set one, just to go in and talk about the unique challenges and things that they face. And having that place for them is so incredibly valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something the listeners can take away. Like, do you have pockets of community where you can feel totally seen, totally felt, totally understood? Or, gosh, like, let's even lower the bar, partially
Yeah,
understood, partially seen. Like, that is medicine right now.
it is. And, you know, what I'm about to say, I wish hadn't become so necessary given circumstances. But when I became the director of NWAS, the big kind of question that I kept asking is, what does it mean for an association to actually become a community?
Mm.
That you move beyond that sort of basics of membership idea. And everything that we've tried to do keeps coming back to that question about what does it mean for us to be a community? How do we support each other? How do we build each other up? How do we push each other? All of that. And we're really fortunate in that NWAS has an incredibly palpable sense of community to it. For example, someone will put out a query for information, and they'll get a untold number of responses, whether it's a policy or whether it's a how do I handle this sticky situation.
Yeah.
And that sustains people.
Yes. Yes. I felt that I was with you all for a day, and I felt the sense of community and the sustaining power of it. I'm totally blanking on the name of the woman who said, shouting self-care at people who really need community care is how we fail each other. And that was true when she said it, which was years ago. But now it feels like there's an urgency and a grimness when there's the absence of that community care, that feels really different than even just a few months ago.
Yeah, it does. And it's always been a challenge in that the ones who are advocating so much for self-care It seems like they're often the ones who aren't taking the time to do the self-care because they're so
Yeah.
busy caring for others.
Yeah.
And I think to some extent, we're starting to see the toll that that takes.
Yeah. It's parallel tracks. It's like, how do we do our own work so that we are in a spiritual state, a nervous system state, a personal state that we can extend that community care.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the other challenge to it is people who get into significant leadership positions, not always, but sometimes, they allow the sense of the urgent to override what's really important.
Yes.
Or it's the immediate overrides the eternal.
Mm.
You know, and it's, I got to get this done. I got to get this done. I got to get this done. And if sometimes people could learn to let things go a little bit, you know, and that's hard because you feel that sense of responsibility.
Totally. And in education, it's so easy to get seduced into thinking the urgent is all there is, because the stream of people needing something right then, it's endless. So, and you get the dopamine rush. When I was a family therapist, we used to talk to families a lot about how when something big feels out of our control, we get hyper focused on little things that we can control.
Yes.
And right now, all the big stuff feels out of control. And so, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that we would fixate on the little stuff, but that just tightens us. It constricts us, and it keeps us at that same consciousness that created this situation we're all experiencing, and we're trying to solve it from that same energetic headspace. And we know from history, I don't remember who said, like, the consciousness that created the issue is never gonna be solved by that same consciousness. So to me, I get really curious. I was talking to someone this weekend about it. I get really curious about, like, what is the inner work for each of us that helps us move out of this frenetic, fear-based, constricted consciousness that's created mayhem, and helps us move into that more inspired, creative, meaning-based place where we actually have a fair fight.
If you figure that out, because it's not just an individual thing. It's not just a family system. It's not just a school system. It's a cultural system.
Right.
You know, and I think there's so many things that play into it. It's, what are our measures of success? What are the values that we truly hold versus saying we hold? It's, you know, if we go back to schools, okay, how often do we really have deliberate, intense conversations about the purpose of education?
Right.
You know, and our country says that they care about education. We do when there's an election and it suddenly gets put on the table.
If it even gets put on the table. You know, often it's absent from even that conversation. Yeah.
But when it comes to, you know, things like funding, big discussions, you know, we tend to see education in a purely return on an investment sort of way, measured by economics.
Hi, I'm Katie Worden, producer of Oxygen for Educators. I want to spotlight our sponsor, TackieBox. TackieBox is an elementary school program that pairs innovative content with a tactile tool in daily practice to teach children to self-monitor their own words and actions and their responses to others. It's a proven tool that reduces behavior incidents by 66%. Through daily self-reflection, students build self-awareness, self-regulation, and meaningful connections. TackieBox is a light lift for teachers with a big impact on student well-being. Go to tackiebox.com to learn more and become a TackieBox district.
I don't remember who did it. And it's been about 10 years since I've seen it. But it was a ranking of the top universities in the United States. And it was kind of a trick question that I posed after I read this. I said, okay, who are the top universities in the United States? And you would have expected the usual names. But it wasn't. Those schools were way down the list because it was all based on social mobility.
Oh, interesting.
And how many of these places had, in some significant ways, made the lives of their people better who'd gone to school there.
Wow.
Now, I don't know exactly how they figured all that out and those sorts of things, but, very different way of thinking about education. Again, going back to that idea of purpose.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I would like to see that list, and I'm encouraged that it's even out there. Like, I'm encouraged that there are some renegades pushing against that traditional narrative that tends to suck the life out of educators and people rather than breathe life into it.
Yeah. And I think, everything somehow communicates, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And we talked about the adults right now and what they're feeling. What I worry about right now more than anything is what are young people, not just their mental health, though I'm really concerned with that, but what are they coming to see as normative behavior?
Right.
And what are the long-term implications of that? And what does that lead them to want to do? And what does that lead them to want to become? Because where do they look for things now?
Right. And it goes back to your earlier point about, like, rather than that grandiose notion of what we're doing in the world, like, what are you doing in your corner of the world? Do you have clarity about how you plug in and what difference you make and what matters to you? And in the cloud of everything that has been normalized, that kind of mentoring and caring for young people and sort of shaping their understanding of their own place in the world is falling away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, great. Kids right now are seeing everything as an us-them. It's me versus you. It's a zero-sum game. It's a right versus wrong. Everything is getting reduced to binaries.
Yeah.
And you tie that to education, that's a very anti-intellectual approach to things.
Right.
There's nothing about nuance in that. There's nothing about trying to figure out, some ongoing quest for truth, whether literal truth and abstract truth or anything like that. I mean, now it's just, get your own truth and just sell it how you want. And I think part of the question becomes, can educators be the ones to kind of take this battle on
Hmm.
and say, you know, we're going to address this. We're going to shift how we do things because of what the real issues are right now.
Wow.
You know,
Say more about that. Like, what do you think that might look like?
well, okay, if I could design a school from scratch, I would have a curriculum not based on subject matter.
Hmm.
It would be based on topics,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be centered around questions.
Mm.
It would be centered around exploration.
Hmm.
You know, now you could bring all your traditional subjects and things into that,
Right.
but education has to evolve. It has to meet the demands of the time.
Mm-hmm.
If I were teaching a history class, I wouldn't start at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I would start it now
Mm-hmm.
and say, okay, let's try to figure out how this is how we ended up here.
Pull those threads.
Yeah, what are the questions that we need to ask to figure that out? And what are the implications
for this
of it?
academy?
What's
can you
that?
make it sign me up for this Mark Crotty Academy?
That's right. Yeah.
It's funny because that's one of the questions I had for you, because your writing has touched me over the years. And I wondered, as you're transitioning to a new role and your life is shifting, if you'll be doing more writing. And I was curious what you're feeling like, ooh, I'd like to write about this. And then I wondered to myself, if you could put something out related to education that was anonymous, what would you write about?
Wow. You know, there have been many times I've thought about writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
But having watched my wife write a book, I'm like, no way.
No, thank you.
No way. I mean, I watched her go through that process and all of that. And I don't think I could do it. I don't know that I have the self-discipline, let alone the talent. I think if I were to do one, I would probably, I would hope. I mean, I couldn't pull it off like he does, but I'd want it to be this sort of philosophical exploration
Uh-huh.
of just big ideas and thoughts I have about education.
Mm-hmm.
What I think it would be for, I mean, a lot of the things that we've talked about today.
Yeah,
I'm going to flip your question a little bit.
please.
I wouldn't want to publish it anonymously,
Mm-hmm.
because if I'm going to write it, I want to be willing to put my name on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I think really good writing has to be part of a conversation.
Love that.
And so, you know, I'd want to put it out there with my name on it. I think that's why I liked blogging so much, because you can get that sort of interaction with people going.
Yeah. Well, I hope you'll consider your blogging turning into whatever you want it to turn into, or just putting more essays out that push our thinking about education evolving and meeting this moment. And I loved what you said about, like, what if some of the change really happens by way of educators? Right now, they're kind of getting whipped around and used as political pawns. And what would it look like for educators to kind of be in a position to take some of that power back and shift how we're shaping young people to meet this moment?
Yeah, as long as you I think one of the things that's difficult with schools and changing schools is for a lot of people who work in them, school worked just fine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they loved school. That's part of why they went into it.
Yeah.
And I think it's also then the ones who do want to change things, you know, it's changing such an ingrained system where the frames are set so hard is
Yeah.
really difficult. I
Yeah.
think it's, and going to your point earlier about, you know, us wanting to grab onto things that we can control,
Yeah.
particularly over the last 2 months where it sort of has peaked.
Yeah.
The change is just so rapid and confusing and to some people disheartening, to some people exciting, and all of these kinds of things that it's hard to even get a foothold to know where do you start with the change.
Yeah. What do you think? What's the answer to that?
The first thing is figuring out what each person needs to do to screw up their courage.
Mm.
Because I think people are scared right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go to certain states and you do certain things in a school and you're putting yourself at great risk.
Yeah. It's real. It's not imagined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that adds a whole new layer to change management. You know,
Yeah.
it's,
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't blame people who are terrified for themselves right now.
No, absolutely not. And it makes me think of like, in the face of the current climate and knowing how rigid school systems can be and how hard it can be to like really create change, to me, the questions you're posing are like a worthy thought experiment, not because we can do the full court press, you know, of the idea in today's circumstances, but even if educators engage in the thought experiments, and then that changes how they show up interaction to interaction, even 2%, just a tiny bit more open-ended questions, tiny bit more this, tiny bit more that, like that adds up.
It does. It does. And I think the other thing that I would add to that, two things. One is the thought experiment is part of what keeps hope alive.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as there's hope, whether it's a smidgen of hope, a slab of hope,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it happens to be, then you can keep doing the work and seeing, you know, the value in it. I think the second reason to keep doing the thought experiment is so that you're ready when the opportunity does come.
Yeah. Yes. And that's where the courage piece comes in too. It's like, how are you in relationship with your own nervous system enough to be able to spot the opportunity when it comes, because you're not in such a triggered fear state that all you can see is, you know, a very, very narrow pinpoint. So your regulated nervous system allows you to at least see the big picture. And then are you doing the work in community within yourself to feel emboldened to the degree that it's safe to do so, to make a move?
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that I'm really proud of in NWAIS is, as an association, we know who we are
Mm-hmm.
and what we believe.
Mm-hmm.
And we've taken some steps to kind of put ourselves out there in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
For example, a few years ago, we really tightened up our non-discrim requirements for membership.
Yep.
We said we're no longer going to allow schools, even if the government gives them an exemption, that we were not going to allow them to discriminate against LGBTQ plus people
Yep.
in hiring or admissions. And we knew it was going to cost us some members.
Yep.
But we said, no, this is who we are. This is what we stand for.
Mhm.
We recently, for the first time in our history, joined a lawsuit against the Idaho state government
Wow.
because of things that they were trying to do against nonprofit and private institutions in their state. So we've kind of, we're trying to walk our talk.
That makes me think about that's one of the things this time is calling for, is to get crystal clear about your values and make value-based decisions, even if they might cost you something.
Yeah.
And the more privileged you are, like as a white woman who's economically stable, like I'm aware where I am on that continuum, and the more privileged you are, the more that's asked of you to take some risks, not just on behalf of you and your group, but on behalf of people who are feeling or are marginalized, ...
Right. As opposed to, well, I'm okay. This isn't going to affect
Right.
me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's one of the most generous examples of leadership that I ever saw was when we were having our discussions about changing our non-discrim requirements. There was a head of school who was on our NWAS board who knew that if we made this decision, his school was probably going to have to leave the association.
Wow.
And he did not hesitate to say, those are the association's values. That is what you need to do.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, there aren't
Yeah.
many people who can think that way.
A lot falls away. A lot of the fear-based confusion that's generated by this level of chaos, like it falls away when you get zeroed into, what do I think? What are my values? If someone's writing this story 100 years from now, how am I going to cast myself based on what I do today? Like those things, I think, are very, they can be oxygen in that it gives you a path that isn't just getting like pulled into the new norms.
Yeah. And I think what it also does in a very similar vein is, of course, with everything going on, we spend a lot of time talking with attorneys, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their thing is always, well, risk management. And
Mhm.
what's your tolerance for risk? I think the better you know who you are,
Mm-hmm.
the more firmly you are grounded in your values, the higher your tolerance for risk.
Oh, wow.
And that, by extension, then builds up your resilience.
Whoa. Okay. You got to say that again. The more you know who you are.
The more you know who you are, the better you're
Uh-huh.
grounded in your values, then you're going to have a higher tolerance for risk because you're going to feel firmer. You're going to feel more grounded.
Yeah.
And when you have that, it then builds up your sense of resilience because you're, to use the cliche in a sense, you're more comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
You know who you are.
Yeah.
I think it also, whether rightly or wrongly, gives you a bit more of a sense of we can weather this.
Right.
We're going to get through this. It may be really ugly. It may be really painful, but we're going to get through it.
I think that also makes you aware of the cost of acting outside your values or shrinking in
Yes.
the face of taking a risk. Like it doesn't become like neutral to not do or say something. It's like, oh, there's a cost to me if I shrink from this.
Yes.
There's a cost to me if I go toward it and take a risk. Either way, there's a cost to me. What do I want to do?
Yeah.
I think in the absence of everything you just said, we can get seduced into thinking the only risky thing is taking action, but there's a risk to our moral fiber, our, everything about our country, our system, our schools, our families, our people, all the layers. I'm babbling now because I'm processing what you just shared. I'm processing out loud, but
It's good babbling.
okay, I'm tracking on time, and this has felt so rich. And a lot of times we ask some rapid fire questions, but I really want to just honor the conversation we had for what it is. But I do want to ask you to tell us about the Educators Collaborative, which is your next chapter. Yeah. And then also if there's anything you were like, oh, when I was thinking about coming on, I wanted to make sure we talked about blank.
Yeah. So Educators Collaborative is, there are 16 partners in the firm. Mm-hmm. And what I really like, we primarily do search for independent school administration.
Okay.
But they do much, much more than that. They do all kinds of consulting, executive coaching, workshops, presentations, governance work. So I'm really honored and excited to join them because it's going to allow me to work in all of these different areas.
You'll be perfect.
I've never done search work before, so I'm really excited about that. And then all the other things that they do, I really, really like. The people in the firm are just awesome. But what I most appreciate about them is they take the collaborative part of their name very, very seriously. They really like to partner and get in, figure things out, and all of that.
What's the footprint? Is it all the whole country, or
it's all over the country? Some international work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And is it independent school specific?
There's a little bit of other nonprofit work, but it's mainly independent schools.
Awesome. It's so good to hear. You'll be perfect for that.
I hope so.
That is such a good match. I love hearing that.
It'll be fun. Yeah.
And then what about the second question? If there's anything you wanted to make sure we covered.
Well, I hope you noticed the Blue October poster over my shoulder.
Totally did. We're going to see them in June. I'm so excited.
Where are you going to see them?
Here in Dallas.
Okay. Yeah.
They're doing the Argue with a Tree album. They're doing some of their old stuff.
I saw that. I was really jealous. I was trying to think if I could get down to Dallas.
Come on. You can be our third wheel. I love it.
No, I mean, this was a great conversation. I'm sure I'm going to, in about an hour, say, I wish we had talked about this, or I wish we had talked about that, but then we'll just have to talk some more.
We'll do a part 2. I love it.
Yeah.
So then let me close this out with Chris's favorite question, who's the co-host. She likes to ask people that if you were to etch a message on a stone that was then found 500 years from now, do you know what you would etch?
It's funny that you asked that question. So I was given a journal the other day, a beautiful leather journal as my departing gift from a group that I've worked with. And I put little taglines on my email.
Mm-hmm. I've seen them.
And the person had gotten them engraved on the journal.
Wow.
It's beautiful.
That's so thoughtful.
Yeah. And my favorite one that I've left on there for a while right now is root for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what I would put on that stone, because that's like eternal, right? That's what we need to do more than anything. And it comes back to that idea of community and building each other up and taking care of each other. And
moving away from the us, them.
Yeah.
That at the end of the day, we are a big us.
Yeah. I mean, this is not a zero-sum game we're playing.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more fun when everybody wins somehow.
Yeah. Hey, Shel Silverstein. Nice to see you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for being you in the world and for being my good friend. And I just appreciate your capacity to live in such an intellectual space, but it's so deeply connected to your heart, and you just don't find that in everyone. So I appreciate you so much.
You just bring it out in me, Michelle. It's a great conversation.
Are you dumb as a rock with most people?
I am.
I don't believe that for a second. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
So we're back. Chris, what were your takeaways? What stood out to you?
I don't even know where to start. There were so many.
Yeah.
But I would probably say just the thought of school being a place that helped kids find their purpose and meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And his comment about how much time is really spent thinking about the purpose of education and the need for evolution. I think that's it right there. Where it should be evolving is so that it is helping kids find purpose and meaning, and not just about compliance and conformity, which is what we have today.
Yes. And you kind of like buried in that, because there was so much in what he said, but also you kind of highlighted the piece of have we even stopped thinking about it? Like, are there spaces where people are even entertaining, should education evolve? And if so, how? Or is everybody kind of pre-surrendering to, this is how it is, it's how it's always been, let's just go writing, what are the 3 R's, which are not R's? Writing, reading, and arithmetic.
Oh, yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
Like, those are not 3 R's. This is a bad start.
We'll give you grace today.
It's a W, an R, and an A, people.
That's a good... Is anybody thinking about that? Is anybody talking about that? I don't know the answer.
I mean, I think for sure people probably are doing that in pockets, but my sense is that the amount of impotence felt around the possibility of really creating something different and shifting things has opted more people out than in. I loved what he said about the value of the thought experiment, that the thought experiment not only allows you to make little small incremental changes inspired by the thought experiment, but let me see if I can remember. He also said it's what keeps hope alive, and it makes you prepared to step into the future when an opening comes. And there's just so much there in his thinking.
This is the year your girl discovers what she loves. She'll make lifelong friends, smile till her cheeks ache, and explore amazing places. She'll try new things, climb higher, and lend a helping hand. She'll change her world, adventuring in ways you never imagined. She'll grow in confidence, turn dreams into reality, and find her voice. And through it all, she'll have big fun. Give your girl the opportunity to grow with Girl Scouts. Visit girlscouts.org/join today.
One thing I thought about too, I feel like everyone that we've had on this podcast who's in education, and they stand out, right? That's how they landed on the podcast. They're very connected to their why and their own meaning in the work.
Yeah.
They all talk about it's the kids and putting the kids first.
Yeah.
And I thought about that group of people leading the charge to shift to where they are helping kids find their own why and their own meaning. there's a big collective of educators out there who still are connected to the why, and I think would feel inspired to do that type of work.
Yes, and I think there's like the micro and the macro, right? Like in classrooms all across the country, we have educators doing this work, even though the containers are pulling in an opposite energetic direction that's more command and control, or testing, or whatever the force is that is pulling away from that deeper work. The educators are still in their classrooms. Many of them are doing this work that creates containers for individuals to become themselves and to step into meaning and purpose. Wasn't it cool that he wrote that in 1980 in his statement, and then just found it again and was like, yep, same, still buy what I was selling then.
Do you remember what he specifically wrote? Was that the piece about schools should be about shaping humans?
Yes, what I wrote down was schools should be about helping children find their meaning and purpose, about how we relate to each other and see each other as contributors. That's so cool. And how different would he also talked about that polarity and the us and them and the binary and how anti-intellectual that is. Like, how different would our relationship be with us and them, and seeking an other for us to feel safe, if from the jump we were trained to see each other as contributors and to pay attention to, what do I do that brings out the best in that other person? And what do they do that brings out the best in me? And it's very interesting to think about.
Yeah, that caught me off guard when you used the us versus them thinking, because we've talked so much about that in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd never thought about what he said. When you're in the us versus them space, you don't take time to think about or seek truth. You just get your own truth. You make your own truth. I think that's happening a lot.
Yeah. That othering, even as we talk about this, I'm like, yes, and I'm in it too. Like, I don't think any of us escape this, but the more and more we push around our awareness that we're doing it, and the why we're doing it, and the ways that it provides an artificial sense of safety, then we can kind of dismantle it in ourselves and ultimately in our society. And even as I say that, I'm like, but can we? It's so, but then I'm taken by his understanding that just because there are some real barriers to redesigning education, that doesn't mean we don't engage in the thought experiment and let this preferred future drive our decisions today versus the more constricted, fear-based, problem focus. Like, here's what we don't want to happen. And then schools get designed from that mentality and that energy, instead of here's what would be a way to interact with students that really meets this moment. And then you act in the constraints, but you are driven by the vision instead of the problem.
And I think the answer is we can do it, because it's about, in some ways, it's putting the power back in the hands of the kids to think about their values, think about what matters to them. They're free. They have the freedom of choice to do that. And then it's an everyday personal responsibility to act in accordance with that.
Yeah, that can get infused with one curious question in a classroom. Like that
Right.
kind of seed gets planted. You're right.
And then you think about what he talked about, which I loved, being super clear on what your values are. And then it makes decision making easier because you make that commitment to act in accordance with your values. Therefore, you're more resilient. Like that all resonated so clearly with me. And I think what we've seen in our work, when you put that power of choice in the hands of a child, they're good stewards of that power. Like they make
Yeah.
good choices. They just need to be empowered to make a choice and realize that they can. And some guidance, of course, to think. And then once you think and understand, you just make that personal commitment that that's what you're committed to. Make your choices based around that.
What a different way to move through the world, feeling like you're navigating it based on your choice, and that's shifting your experience versus you're just getting whipped around by life. I shared your jaw drop when he talked about, I wrote it down. He said, the better you know who you are, the more firmly you're grounded in your values, the higher tolerance you have for risk, which then builds your sense of resilience. We could have a whole semester course on that idea. There's so much in there. And I think everyone can agree this is a time where if we're going to generate and create a preferred future, it's going to require some risk taking. But I had never connected the dots like he did around that there's some pre-work there. Get really clear on your values, then risk-taking is easier, which then builds our sense of resilience. I just thought that was so interesting.
Get so clear on your values that you wear them on your wrist every day.
Yeah. Exactly.
Helps you go through life. I had thought about that piece because I feel it as a human. I think that's how you become resilient, is to be that clear. But what I hadn't thought about is your comment where you kind of had an aha light bulb moment where you connected. There's also, I don't know exactly how you said it, but there's
risk
an impact
of inaction.
Yes, the risk of
Yeah.
inaction and not doing something. And I think that's a very common, I think that's common, and people don't realize that there is damage done or an impact. I don't know if damage is the right word. I might be getting too dramatic over here, but imagine that.
No, I follow you. Yeah, I think that changes the equation completely. If you're going through life thinking, if I take this risk, X, Y, or Z might happen. But so I'll just stay here in this quote unquote safe zone. But if you're thinking there's a X, Y, or Z might happen if I take this risk, X, Y, or Z might happen if I don't take action in line with my values. It's an entirely different equation that pushes you in one direction or another versus this false notion that I can either stay put or make a move. There really is no staying put.
And I think the risk of making a move is an external risk. The risk of not making a move is an internal risk because you're at conflict with your values and your meaning and your why. And that internal conflict.
Yeah.
I would much rather risk the external than the internal.
Yeah. That incongruence is almost like a moral injury. Yeah. Interesting.
I also liked his comments around shifting the metrics. And what I heard, I don't think these were his words, but what I heard was shifting our metric around all of this to value-based decision making. Like, are you operating in alignment with the values that you've clearly identified? And not worrying so much about, are you normal? Because what is normal anyway? You know?
Yeah.
You just decide what matters to you, and are you walking in that every day?
Yeah. And paying attention to the fact that in the absence of doing that work, you're still being driven by values, but they're being imposed on you. They might be the values of your system or the values of your country or the values of whatever. You're still kind of like, you've almost like co-signed contracts you never read. And you're just like going through the world of like, okay, I guess success looks like ... Or, okay, I guess I'm at this age, I should have this car, or I should have this job, or I should whatever. So, you're still getting bossed around by values, but they might not be yours. If you do that work of like identifying, but what is it I care about? Who is it I want to be in this world? And then I like the phrase like unapologetic, like unapologetically move toward alignment, which is a lifelong process, like every day, all day long. Who do I look like when I'm unapologetically aligned with my values? Boy, I could see a really different vibe in our country, in education, just in all systems, if everybody was doing that personal work and then their action flowed from that values inspired, unapologetic alignment instead of just almost like a collective coma.
I love that. And of course, always considering how, as we say, how you show up impacts the community around you. Because there's, you always have to be thinking about your choices and your actions in context of the larger community too.
Absolutely.
That was, I know you haven't watched that documentary yet, but when you watch Victor and I, which is amazing, I can't remember I think it was Viktor Frankl that talked about we should have a Statue of Liberty on the East Coast and a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast, because logotherapy is about having the freedom to make your choices, but the overlay of responsibility to those around you.
I love that.
I do too.
Yes, so good. We're so serious today. I think Mark brought it out in us. Like, and he's a very playful person. Like, he's not, but he's also just such a deep thinker. Like, I think we're trying to match his gravitas.
We can't.
We can't.
Let's don't kid ourselves. But I appreciate you taking us there.
Oh, yeah. We want the by association, gravitas by association. Yeah, he's a really remarkable person and leader, and I'm glad he's in this world.
Me too. What else came up for you?
We've covered a lot of the big ones, but I did want to tell folks I remembered that shouting self-care at people who really need community care is how we fail each other. That's Nikita Valeria's quote. I couldn't remember it on the podcast. I also wanted to tell folks that when Mark says NWAIS, he's talking about the Northwest Association of Independent Schools, which is his work right now through June. I loved his language. I've heard that notion of the urgent overriding the important a whole lot. I think Covey talked about that. But what I hadn't heard is his phrasing, the immediate overriding the eternal.
Eternal. I wrote that
and
down
that was
too.
so cool. I mean,
Well,
what
and that
a
takes
guiding light for today's world.
100%. And that takes you back to, in order to know what your eternal is, you have to be clear on your values and what you're meaning, and you have to be self-aware so that you can do that when those things pop up all day long, which are going to happen in a school. And
Yeah.
I also was going to mention, because of the conversation around kind of starting with you and doing your own piece, just to reference the meditation that you put for our speaking thing last week, to let people know that it's available, and that is something that they could easily do daily.
Yeah, it's on the podcast in the extras section. It's a 5-minute exercise that mirrors what our Tacky Box kids do in schools, but it's, of course, adult facing. And yeah, I think that would be one of many ways that people could get clearer and clearer on that, what that eternal is for them, what their values are. Separate it from all the noise.
I also thought, just from the place of offering oxygen to educators, the discussion around deep listening and how that impacts you when you have someone who's deeply listening to you. It just made me think about the importance of being sure you have that cohort of people in your orbit that can do that for you.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point to end on, that in a time in our history where it can be really hard to know what to do and what to do for the people in our circles, the medicine of listening, of the medicine of presence, and the prioritizing, activating your circles to both serve them in that way and to be served by them in that way. I everywhere I go, I hear people thinking differently about their communities and their relationship to their people. Can I share a metaphor?
Please.
So I think it's Dr. Stephen Finn. I think I'm right about that. He's a pediatrician, and he uses the metaphor of a cup and saucer. So he says that young children come into the world as these tiny little cups. And if you picture liquid going into the cup, the cup is so tiny that, of course, the liquid spills out, and that the saucer is the parent, the teacher, any trusted caregiver, and their work is to catch the liquid that comes out. And if they do that well, then the cup over time grows and grows and grows. And the metaphor is that the child's capacity to navigate challenges, to self-regulate, grows over time, but only if they first experience co-regulation, which is that saucer, right? Now, in our culture, we have this misunderstanding that once we have the capacity to self-regulate, we no longer need co-regulation, and that's false. We have a lifelong biological imperative to co-regulate. And in today's world, people are more aware and awake to the fact that they need other nervous systems to manage their feelings about the rapid change, anxiety about what's coming, all of the things. And they're right. They're absolutely right. And so, I often talk to groups about, like, do you know who your saucers are? And especially educators, they can tell me who they are a saucer for. And they're showing up as the best saucers you've ever seen. But when you turn the question to, but who are your saucers, and are you deploying them, or are you saving them for when you have a bigger crisis? there's usually like some like whoa looks in the room, because a lot of times, especially educators, are like, I'm good. Let me just give. And what we know from the neuroscience is you cannot stay in that state endlessly unless you are co-regulating with other nervous systems, unless you have activated your saucers.
I so hope that anyone listening takes that to heart, because I feel like I know firsthand the difference in living the two different ways, because I did live without a saucer for a really long time.
Yeah.
And I don't anymore. And I feel like a different person because of that. So I hope anyone listening really, really thinks about that and knows who their saucers are.
What is the difference for you living in relation to your saucers? Like, what do you notice?
Back to my data. Stress goes down. You process things at a faster clip than trying to do it by yourself. It's just different to white knuckle something just because you can, which I can, versus sharing it and talking about it. And yeah, it just everything feels less catastrophic.
So good.
So, hey, thanks for being a saucer.
Hey, same.
You too, Katie.
Yeah, you too, Katie. Katie's an extraordinary saucer.
Yeah, she
It's in
is.
her DNA to be a saucer.
Yeah, we know that.
All
to
right.
be true.
Yeah. So should we wrap for Mark? It's hard
I
to
hope we
wrap
did
on
him
this
justice. I just hope we did him justice, because
I
he's
do
remarkable,
too.
and I'm so grateful that you had a conversation with him.
Yeah, he is so wonderful, and I know he's just going to do even more interesting things in his next chapter. Sally Crotty, who's his wife, is equally extraordinary. She's a poet and an author, and has written an incredible memoir, if anybody wants to check that out. But yeah, Mark is an N of one, and I'm really glad we got to learn from him.
You referenced his writings when you guys were talking at the beginning. Is there somewhere to send people if they want to read more about his thinking?
That's a great question. I know at one point he had a blog, but I don't know if he still does.
We should find out, and if so, we'll put it somewhere.
Yeah. Love it. Awesome.
And when I say we know who.
And by we mean
Thanks, Katie.
Katie, goddess of light and love.
That's her new title. There's her title.
We finally found one that's properly encompassing of her genius.
All right. Well, thank you for your
Awesome.
time.
Well, thanks,
this was
Chris.
fun.
We'll see you. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.